So a while ago, an Australian gamer going by the username of Goodblood released a very interesting video called Dear Sega, where he explored what he thought Sega should do with their Sonic the Hedgehog game franchise. If you haven't seen it yet, it might be a good idea to watch that before you watch this video. It's not required viewing, I'm just saying that now would be a good time to use the annotation currently on screen to go watch his video first. It's a good video. He brings up some very interesting points about what he perceives Sonic's demographic to be, namely that it's mostly people over 25 who grew up with the Sega Genesis games, versus the fact that Sega themselves is quite clearly still targeting children for the Sonic franchise, even though the colorful kids mascot platformer genre has been on life support for over a decade. My problem with his video comes about the time he delves into how he thinks Sega should salvage Sonic. He proposes a reboot that essentially ditches everything that ever defined the Sonic franchise and turns it into a 2D indie puzzle platformer where Sonic looks like Finn from Adventure Time painted blue. And to put it politely, I don't know how that could be anything that anyone would ever want from a Sonic game. I myself have been a Sonic fan since 1991, and I've been thinking about how to develop games since about 1995. When my friends and I thought we could make our own sequel to Sonic & Knuckles, and foolishly tried to pitch our ideas to Sega by sending them a letter. And in saying that, I know all too well that backseat game design like this rarely ever does anything, and there are already a million articles and videos and things out there on the internet about how to fix Sonic the Hedgehog. But if that Goodblood video exists, then I feel I am at least allowed a response. It's a response I wanted to do months ago, but those of you following me on social media will know just how busy I was with other responsibilities last year. With 2016 being Sonic's 25th anniversary and a new game being announced soon, I figure that if I don't say these things now, I'll miss my chance. So the biggest red flag to me was that this Goodblood person suggests that Sega should ditch Sonic's attitude and make him into a more pensive, trepidatious character. Looking back, the attitude of the 1990s can seem absolutely insufferable, but it's important to distance yourself from cringing at the kind of teenager you used to be back then. Sonic's personality wasn't really a new thing in the 1990s. He was kind of just a cooler, more modern take on Bugs Bunny, and some of Sonic's cartoons of the era intentionally played this up.
Dr. Robotnik, you men in power are so powerful. Isn't there somewhere where we could be alone?
Certainly, but my robo-wife mustn't see us together.
John! Marsha! Whoa!
Bugs Bunny's been around for over 75 years, and he's never lost his edge. So why should Sonic? If you broke down his character, I'd say that Sonic's supposed to be fast. That much is obvious. And by that character trait alone, he's meant to be this kind of smarmy character that can leap before he looks, because he can get himself into and out of trouble faster than most of us can even finish a sentence. A related example for me would be the Flash. If you remember him from the Justice League cartoon, he was cocky and brash because he was too fast for anything to be much of a danger to him.
We appreciate the offer, Flash, but...
Unless you've got an S on your chest, you're useless.
Hey, I may not be as strong as Superman, but I'm just as fast. Maybe faster. Friends.
It only makes sense that Sonic would carry the same sort of irreverent charisma. Sonic should be a character that knows he's kind of unstoppable and has fun with that fact.
It's not going to be that easy!
Dada!
Wait it! Oh, you hold still! Got it! Oh, you can't break through this polymer alloy! Oh! Sugar I'll get you!
Next, let's take a look at Sonic's visual design. This is from Goodblood's video, and it's what he thinks Sonic should look like in his hypothetical game. This is not how you redesign a character. Sure, characters evolve over the years, but never quite this drastically. The modern incarnations of Mickey Mouse, Mario, and Bugs Bunny are still recognizable as the characters they always were. This redesigned Sonic goes a little too far off the deep end, and leans a little too heavily on an aesthetic fad that might not even be around in 10 years. It's just not iconic, and regardless of what you think of his games, Sonic the Hedgehog is definitely an iconic-looking character. So really, I'm not necessarily of the mind that Sonic the Hedgehog even needs to be visually redesigned. I think the current so-called modern look for Sonic is just fine, but that's not to say it can't be pushed or pulled in certain directions. I've always been fond of the Japanese toy manufacturer Nendoroid's Sonic Generations figure from a few years ago, which combines the classic 90s Sonic design with modern Sonic visual elements, providing the best of both worlds. And then there's this fan-made image, which was floating around on the internet back when Sega first announced Sonic 4 Episode 1. Both images share a commonality in that they bring Sonic back down to a shorter, more stockier appearance, while simultaneously suggesting that there are elements of modern Sonic's visual design that are worth keeping. I think that if you really absolutely had to redesign Sonic to look visually different, going in this direction would probably suit everyone best. Different, but still familiar and harkening back to simpler times. But what really matters is gameplay, right? Sonic the Hedgehog is a video game after all. If you ask me, one of the reasons Sonic has stuck around in the face of such critical animosity is because most Sonic games come from a well-meaning place. Even the worst Sonic games often contain the germ of a good idea. It just gets buried under a mountain of sloppy, unpolished gameplay. Signs point to a lot of Sonic games not getting enough development time to fully realize their own concepts, leaving a lot of half-baked ideas left to die in rushed, quickly forgotten games. So don't be surprised if some of the ideas I'm about to put forth seem a little familiar in certain aspects. Now, the first two problems I want to tackle are about control and scripting, and how the two are interlinked. Okay, so what is the number one complaint that players have of even the best 3D Sonic games? Well, it's that the games play themselves. They are constantly taking control away from the player to show impressive scenes where Sonic runs away from a whale, or hits a bunch of springs and gets launched in a cool way, or something like that, right? And as a player, while that looks cool, it's not actually that cool, because it feels like you could set the controller down and the game would keep going without you. Sonic Adventure's whale chase is what is referred to as a scripted scene. The term comes from cinema. Actors follow a script in order to make a movie, and all the whale chase sequences is just a movie. If Sonic and the whale follow their scripts, then the movie plays out correctly. So at the heart of this, you should be asking yourself, why does Sonic need to follow a script? Obviously it looks cool, but the bigger underlying issue is that during scripted scenes, Sonic is often doing things that would be too complex for the player to handle. Think of the whale chase scene again. During normal gameplay, the camera is following behind Sonic at a distance. When the scripted scene begins, the camera swings 180 degrees to show a close-up shot of Sonic from the front. With the way controlling Sonic works, if the camera swung around to show you the front of Sonic while the player was still in control, you just bump into a wall and instantly die. Essentially, the game is telling you,
hey, don't worry about it, I'll just do this part for you, because otherwise I know you'd just screw it up and kill yourself.
And as patronizing as that might sound, that's actually totally correct. A lot of the time, a scripted scene exists to prevent you from accidentally committing suicide, and given the way Sonic typically controls, scripting is a necessary evil. Anyone who's ever broken out of the scripting in a 3D Sonic game will know this, as you almost instantly die. This is all compounded by Sonic's speed. Ask anyone who's good at geometry and they'll tell you, even the smallest change in direction gets multiplied the faster you're moving. The more speed Sonic has, the more difficult it will be to keep him under control. Sega has spent literal decades trying to crack how to make Sonic control well in 3D. It really boils down to how sensitive Sonic should be to analog stick input. Higher sensitivity means Sonic is more responsive to controller input, and that's not always a good thing. If analog sensitivity is too high, and Sonic becomes ultra responsive to input, then the game will be almost impossible to control at high speeds. Look at Sonic 2006. That game has over-responsive controls, and it's a nightmare to steer Sonic. On the other hand, high sensitivity is very useful for slower action games, like Mario, Ratchet & Clank, and Banjo-Kazooie. One alternative to make Sonic easier to control at high speed is to reduce his analog sensitivity, making his controls less responsive. This better mimics what really happens when objects are traveling at high speed. But now you've got the opposite problem. When Sonic slows down, the controls feel sluggish and, well, less responsive. Sega actually tried to do this with Sonic Heroes, and it didn't feel especially great. And since the dawn of the 3D Sonic game, these philosophies have kind of been at war with each other. For one reason or another, Sega has never found a comfortable middle ground between the two control styles. Because of this, and because of the inherent difficulty with just normally controlling Sonic, 3D Sonic games employ lots of scripting to help the player finish the level without dying. As I implied earlier, scripting is not necessarily evil. Naughty Dog uses scripting to help guide Nathan Drake through the environment in Uncharted to give their games an amazing cinematic feel. But if scripting is used in Sonic games so much that they've developed a negative stigma for automatically playing themselves, and have even led some to say that 3D Sonic games are impossible to make, then I think it's time to take a step back and evaluate better options. So how do we fix this? Well, let's look at other games that go really fast. Sega and Nintendo's F-Zero GX on the GameCube, Criterion Games' Burnout series on the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, and Ubisoft's Trackmania on the personal computer. First and foremost, you should notice that all three are racing games. That's because the easiest way to deal with this level of speed isn't through 3D platformer controls, it's with driving game controls. When you're controlling a 3D action game character, you have to hold a direction on the analog stick to get your character to move in that direction. Push left to walk left, push up to walk forward, and so on. In a driving game, you don't really have this problem. When you're using a steering wheel, all you really need to be concerned about is how far to crank the wheel to the left or right. Instead of worrying about 360 possible directions, you only need to focus on those two, left or right. Sonic games are more like racing circuits, and as such, you're almost always going to be holding forward. The thing is, in order to steer Sonic, you kind of have to stop holding forward in order to move your thumb around on the analog stick to other directions. This is a big problem, and it's one that is more or less unique to Sonic because of how fast he is. An idea how to solve this problem struck me while playing a pair of games, one of which was even actually a Sonic game. The first one was an early open-world superhero game called Hulk: Ultimate Destruction. What's notable in this context is the way the Hulk himself moves around the world. Usually, Hulk moves like a normal 3D action game character. By moving the analog stick around, you direct Hulk around the environment. But by pushing in an analog trigger, Hulk will suddenly dash forward and immediately begin running. While in this running state, Hulk can smash through vehicles, run up walls, and drift around corners almost like you're controlling a car. Being able to switch between a precise walking mode and the less precise but more open running mode feels really good. The developer behind Hulk Ultimate Destruction, Radical Entertainment, later went on to develop the Prototype series of games, which took everything they learned in Hulk and expanded upon it. Running around the world in Prototype looks legitimately cool, and it kinda reminds me of the sort of stuff you saw Sonic the Hedgehog do in the opening cutscene of Sonic CD. But what really solidified this for me was playing Sonic R, a spin-off game originally released for the Sega Saturn. Sonic R saw Sonic and his friends compete in a foot race. If you wanted to, you could play Sonic R like a normal 3D action game, where you'd push forward on the analog stick to accelerate and jump using the buttons. Sonic R has gained a reputation for being kinda difficult to control because of this, but what I suspect isn't as widely known is that you can also play Sonic R like a driving game. Alternate to the jump button is a traditional accelerator button, just like the gas pedal in a car. This makes the game quite a bit easier to control because it frees the analog stick up for smaller, finely tuned control adjustments. just like using the steering wheel on a car. So my solution for how to solve 3D Sonic's control problem is simple. Give Sonic a gas pedal of sorts, or maybe something like a run button with one mode for going fast and a slower mode for precision movement. Sonic games kind of actually already do this with the boosting mechanic introduced in Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors, and Sonic Generations. I suspect that even less people know that once you start boosting in one of those games, Sonic will propel himself forward, leaving you to control him exclusively with the left and right analog stick motions. Again, just like a steering wheel. But while the boost ability is cool, Sega's usage of it doesn't always hit the mark. For example, once you start boosting, there's no easy way to slow down. There are ways to stop moving entirely, but by and large you are either boosting at maximum speed or you aren't, and there's very little in between. Boosting also makes you invincible to most damage, which helps you cope with how fast you're moving, but also probably contributes to the idea that Sonic games sort of play themselves. And because boosting makes you invincible, boosting has to be a limited resource that can eventually be depleted, and that in itself causes other reverberating problems. It's kind of like making the run button in Super Mario Bros. A limited resource. So to break it all down, here's what I do, and as a disclaimer, even though all this artwork is going to be in 2D, you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit to picture what this would look like in a 3D game, because I'm kind of awful at drawing 3D landscapes. While using the analog stick, Sonic controls like a normal 3D action game. Think of something like Super Mario Galaxy, where you move the analog stick in 360 degrees to direct your character with tight, responsive controls. Push in the right trigger and Sonic gets a small burst of speed and begins accelerating under his own power like a car. The longer you hold down the accelerator, the faster Sonic starts to move. Now, Sonic's eventual top speed is important, because it needs to feel fast without being out of control. And that's because, even while running, I think Sonic should remain vulnerable to damage. If an enemy or an obstacle gets in the way, tapping a button will give Sonic an extra burst of speed and make him spin into a ball, smashing through whatever is in front of him. And if the player needs to slow down, the left trigger will act as a brake pedal, which, as an added benefit, will also enable Sonic to drift around corners if the player steers while braking. If the player is no longer holding down the gas pedal and Sonic's speed drops below a certain threshold, normal 3D action game control is restored. By giving Sonic freely usable gas and brake pedals, you greatly enhance the player's ability to successfully control Sonic at high speed in 3D environments. This means that those notorious scripted sequences where you watch the game play itself can be reduced or even outright eliminated entirely, empowering the player to actually play the game. Just look at Trackmania. That game zips you around loop-de-loops, corkscrews, and through wall rides, all without ever needing to take control away from its players. For years now, I've wished for a Sonic game that played like Trackmania, and there's even a Sonic skin for Trackmania Nations that goes a long way towards completing the effect. But that's just one part of what I have in mind. For the meat and potatoes of gameplay, I think it would be best to look at Sega's greatest legacy, arcade games. Next to Konami, Capcom, and Namco, Sega was one of the titans of the arcade industry, producing legendary games like Outrun, Space Harrier, Afterburner, Daytona USA, Virtua Fighter, House of the Dead, and Crazy Taxi. Quite a lot of those are racing games, and what I mentioned here is only scratching the surface. Sonic's bread and butter has also been in similar arcade-related realms. Gaining points and learning a game's scoring system has been an important part of even the most recent Sonic games. I think this is an important niche that needs to be preserved and carried forward into future games. So, for Sonic, I think sticking to arcade-like gameplay elements would probably work pretty well. In the classic Sonic games, you had 10 minutes to get to the end of a stage, but the clock started at 0 and then counted up to 10, meaning you often didn't even know you had a time limit until it was almost too late. I propose flipping that around. Instead of a clock counting up to 10, we'll have a clock counting down. Every time the player touches a checkpoint, they receive an extension that puts more time on the clock. This presents a clear message that the player doesn't have time to slow down. The incentive is to keep moving forward. The important thing here is that time on the clock doesn't really have to be that strict. It could start at 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. The point is that the player is aware of and motivated by the countdown. Special emphasis should be paid to Sonic's acrobatic abilities. Given his energetic personality, Sonic the Hedgehog should be a character who likes to show off. And in keeping with the spirit of limiting scripted sequences, a lot of level elements should be about Sonic propelling himself forward through his own power. Most 3D Sonic games use booster pads to both force Sonic to run at a certain speed, or to automatically change the player's direction. I think these are a crutch that have been relied on far too much, and they just aren't fun to use. But with the idea of Sonic using his own momentum as propulsion, one example could be a vertical pole sticking out of the ground. Once Sonic gets close enough, he grabs on, spins around, and then flings himself in the required direction. It's a similar functionality to the boost pad, but with one very important difference. The player is using their own momentum instead of relying on an automated machine. You could even make this mechanic interactive. Once Sonic grabs onto the vertical pole, maybe he doesn't let go until the player pushes a button or pumps the accelerator. The longer Sonic holds onto the vertical pole, the more speed he begins to lose over time, so using the pole becomes a twitch element to keep moving forward quickly. Following this train of thought, an acrobatic trick system was a staple of the Sonic Rush games, and I think something like that needs to stay a core part of Sonic's moveset. It doesn't need to be as in-depth as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but just enough that it still feels meaningful. And that's because I think Sonic would also benefit from a larger scale combo system that tracks more than just acrobatic stunts, and instead tracks all of the player's actions in a level and rewards them for doing cool things. Essentially, the game would silently award invisible style points for everything the player does. Then, once the player acquires enough style points, they get a score bonus. Sonic Adventure 2 had a system similar to this, but it wasn't always clear on how to earn style points or why they were even being awarded sometimes. Instead, I propose something with greater clarity that is intentionally designed to be exploitable. You do this by giving each score bonus a different category, telling the player what they did to earn it, like collecting a bunch of rings in a short amount of time, or defeating a lot of enemies without touching the ground, or even getting to the next checkpoint really quickly. The overarching theme is that players should be able to go from the start of a stage to the end, linking together various combos, resulting in fast, stylish play and a hefty score bonus to go with it. All of this would ultimately feed into that stage's final score, which would give the player a rating based on how many points they'd achieved. Relevant data like highest score and fastest time would be automatically posted to a leaderboard, with quick access to functionality in order to challenge your friends and race against their time trial replays. You could even go the extra mile and introduce a weekly competitive ladder system, like the one found in the Sonic Runners mobile game. This would provide a sense of progression to these leaderboard elements, turning a single-player game into almost kind of an asynchronous esport. Okay, so, I know everything I just said is a lot to take in. So let's do a brief recap for everything I would do to fix Sonic the Hedgehog. Number 1, I'd leave his visual design alone. It's mostly fine as it is. Number 2, don't get rid of his attitude. If anything, maybe dial it up a little bit more. 3, enhance Sonic's speed by giving him vehicle-like controls and empowering the player to use Sonic's own momentum as propulsion. Take away scripting. Number 4, double down on arcade game concepts like a countdown timer and a deep score combo system to incentivize going fast and playing with style. Number 5, emphasize Sonic's more competitive aspects with an esports leaderboard ladder and time trial racing to keep players coming back to the game even after they've finished the story. The original Sega Genesis Sonic games may have been regarded as platformers, but Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Generations touched on something far more interesting, a Sonic game that's more about speedrunning, where quick reflexes and a high level of execution are more important than anything else. The ideas I've proposed follow down a similar path, only with a greater focus on making the player feel like they are in control. Now, like I said earlier, my ideas might not seem like a radical shakeup. That's because they largely don't need to be. Games like Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Generations are most of the way to becoming really good games. They just need a little more focus and a little more content. Most Sonic games are only bad because they're confused, rushed, and sloppy. By trimming the fat and focusing on what they did well, you have all of the elements you need to make something great. After publishing his Dear Sega video, the Good Blood channel published a second video where he describes his reasoning behind the choices he made in his reboot video. If you listen to what he has to say, he admits to not really caring about Sonic games. He was a fan who lapsed out of interest at some point and lost touch with the series. I really can't blame him for turning away like that, but it does obviously create this problem where you have a lot of other Sonic fans that would rather you don't come in and stomp all over their sandcastle just because you haven't been paying attention. And Good Blood's words feed into a larger problem. The notion that Sonic the Hedgehog as a game cannot ever work in 3D. That Sonic has to be a 2D game franchise. That notion has always been more than a little bit cynical to me. There are bits and pieces of Sonic the Hedgehog in tons of very successful 3D games. You just have to know where to look. For example, I see elements of Sonic the Hedgehog in the downhill course design of the SSX series. I see it in the ball-rolling physics of games like Marble Blast Ultra. I see Sonic's irreverently energetic attitude in Dante from Devil May Cry. And Jet Set Radio's inherent coolness is the same tone Sonic originally had back in the 90s. The list just keeps going on. The Psygnosis PlayStation racing game Roll Cage and its spiritual successor Grip both play with gravity in a lot of the same way Sonic used to, and Mirror's Edge, Temple Run, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater all have combo-centric gameplay that focuses on fluidity and movement, a lot like a Sonic game. And then there's the old Spyro the Dragon games, with a running headbutt that basically functions like Sonic's boost ability. And, as I mentioned earlier in the video, the speed-focused, gravity-defying F-Zero GX and Trackmania both share elements typically associated with Sonic. Even Mario borrows from Sonic. There are 2 levels in Super Mario Galaxy 2 that bear more than a passing resemblance to Sonic's gameplay fundamentals. Hot-stepping Dash Pepper sees Yoshi speedily run up vertical walls, and Tall Trunk's Big Slide forces Mario down a high-speed track where he must dodge obstacles. The only people who think it is impossible for Sonic the Hedgehog to work in 3D just aren't trying hard enough. Much like that Good Blood guy when he suggested his weird Adventure Time reboot for Sonic, they simply gave up a long time ago. Well, I inexplicably haven't given up. Maybe that just means I'm another weirdo Sonic fan, but this is my crazy vision for what I think could work, and I have so many more ideas that I could have talked about, but that would have made this video way longer than it already is. It's also important to note that, just like what Good Blood covered in his video, what I'm proposing here is just my ideal Sonic game. Sega has let Sonic become a lot of very different things over the years, and as a result, the Sonic franchise has developed a bad case of multiple personality disorder. Everyone kinda has their own ideas for what they think Sonic should be, because they might be coming at it from a different branch of Sonic's family tree. This is one of the reasons why Sonic fans can't ever seem to agree on what they want out of Sonic games. They could be coming from the cartoons, or the old games, or the new games, or the comic books, or whatever. I'm sure there's more than a few Sonic fans out there that will see this video and scoff at it, much in the same way I scoffed at Good Blood's original Dear Sega video. But maybe that in itself is part of a larger problem. Maybe Sega needs to keep Sonic on a tighter leash, and help rein in all the different versions of the character that are kicking around out there. Whatever the case may be, it's clear it's time for things to change. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. But Sonic the Hedgehog didn't get anywhere by merely standing around in one place. Hey everyone, thanks for watching my video. It's been a long time coming. If you like this video, I've got a whole channel full of cool stuff. I do a little bit of a lot of different things, and if you really want to stay on top of what's going on, you can also check out my blog, which has been updating daily for over 3 years. You can also check out my professional writing on tssznews.com and bltn.net. Videos like this one also would not be possible without the support of my Patreon backers, like Logan, Anders, and Nolan. For just $1 or $2 a month, you can get exclusive side content like podcasts, games, and music. And if you don't want to pledge money, there's still a bunch of free content on my Patreon anyway, so check it out. And once again, thank you very much for watching.